I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for October the 17th, 2023, October the 18th in the Eastern Hemisphere. As is always the case in these videos, the thoughts expressed are mine alone, and when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look toward the local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we've got a lot to go over today, and we're going to be going pretty much across the entire world today, as there are systems across the Indian Ocean, the South Pacific, the West Pacific, the East Pacific, and the North Atlantic that may threaten land within the next 7 days. So it's going to be a busy week, and I'll leave timestamps so you all can skip ahead to whatever you want to, as I will be going over all of these systems. So we're not going to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start in the North Indian Ocean, as we are getting now into, I guess, the secondary peak, if you will, of the North Indian Ocean cyclone season that typically goes through the entire year. We typically have our first peak in May, late spring, into early June. And we had that early this year with Cyclone Mocha and Cyclone Biparjoy. But then the summer monsoon comes in, and that typically negates most tropical cyclone development during the summer months. But now we're getting into autumn, and now the summer monsoon has calmed down quite a bit and has ended for the most part. And now, with the monsoon out of the way, you can start to get a little bit more favorable environments taking shape. And if a disturbance is there, you can get tropical cyclone development. We've got two potential systems to watch in both the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, and I'm going to be talking about these. But first, let's go to Invest 91A. This is the Arabian Sea system here west of India now, and I'm showing you water vapor first, as there is not much to see in the lower level infrared loop. But if you look at the water vapor, you can see, if you look around the system, we've already got a pretty favorable anticyclonic look aloft over the Arabian Sea. And you can see, if I remove my pen and I remove everything from the screen, if you just pay attention to the water vapor loop, you can get a sense of general anticyclonic flow around, over Invest 91A. And this is pretty good, because it's typically the pattern that you would look for in an ideal scenario for a system to develop. The ideal scenario being convergence in the low levels, to where you have winds converging to say an area of low pressure like we have here with Invest 91A. Then all that wind, or all those air parcels, rise throughout the troposphere, and then once they get into the upper troposphere, they meet the divergence in the upper levels, and they can expand away from the system. That's the ideal general envelope, I suppose, for the troposphere that you would want for a developing tropical cyclone. And we've got that here with 91A, and this general flow is forecast to remain. And you can see that on the GFS. This is by Saturday morning local time. And you can see the divergence aloft being even greater on this front, with all of these divergences pretty much in all directions aloft. And this is very favorable, and this is typically something that you would see if you look at tropical cyclones a lot and their development. This is typically a pattern aloft that you would see in a system that might have potential to intensify, potentially to a significant degree. And it remains unclear on exactly how strong this system may get at a certain point, but there is some guidance, particularly from the GFS, that the system might become a significant strength system in the Arabian Sea. And given the environment here, I can see why the GFS is very strong here on its runs. And there is a little bit of difference between the GFS and the European. If I go to the same time on the European, you can see it has a much weaker system, and that's generally a tropical depression or a weak tropical storm, while the GFS here has a formidable tropical storm by that point, maybe getting closer to a cyclone. What I think might be happening here is the Euro does tend to go weaker with a lot of systems. It has a weak bias. And I think, especially given the sounding that you can get over the system, if you look at the sounding from the European, we don't have much shear. And given the environment that you see aloft, I don't see much reason why the system wouldn't be intensifying from here. So I feel like this might be a little bit of that bias coming into play. However, this does still, give some sense into potentially see if the system struggles a little bit to consolidate. we have had times before where we've had what seems to be a very favorable environment, and a system just struggles to consolidate over time, potentially from factors that may not be seen by forecasters, or systems that or factors that may not be seen by models all too well. So we'll have to watch exactly how 91A develops here. But in terms of right now, I'm more inclined to agree with the GFS on what we may have, by this weekend, especially if we start to see more significant development of this system. Now, in terms of track, the system is forecast to generally track westwards over the coming days, and I'll show you that here. I'll go to the 500 millibar flow. I think it's vorticity is what I wanted to go through. I don't have the exact map pulled up, but you can see in the general sounding from the GFS, we have general flow carrying the system towards the west in the mid to upper levels. Now we do have a southerly push rather, from the low levels, and this may impart some shear upon the system, but it also might try and get the system to come further north earlier. And the exact timing of when this system comes north does play into, exactly who gets what impacts, as if the system does come a little bit further north a bit quicker, it could come east of Oman and potentially threaten areas in Pakistan and Western India. On the other hand, we could have the system tracking a little bit further west, like the European shows. If I go to the European and show you that sounding again, on the model, you can see we generally have westerly flow, and this would keep the system going generally towards the west, and by the time it eventually recurves, we could get the system coming into Oman, and that could change impacts drastically for a large area here in the northern Arabian Sea. Now, I'm going to show you the 500 millibar flow over portions of Asia, and you can see here's our storm here on the model. It's already come north and it's east of Oman on the GFS. Now, by this point, we do have, I should note, a ridge in the lower levels. This is trying to pull the system towards the north. And there's also, I should mention, another ridge aloft east of the system. That's also pulling the system northward. And we also have, while I'm showing you this large view of Asia, is we have this trough here on the model digging in from Russia. And you can see this digs in on the model, and this, as the system comes north, picks it up and brings it into eastern Pakistan and into western India here. Now, this is over a week out. Let me show you that this frame that I just showed you, this is 7 days out. So naturally, there's already a bit of uncertainty here. And one big uncertainty is on exactly how the pattern is here over the Middle East and into Asia. The GFS has this ridge here over the eastern Mediterranean Sea with this trough able to break through this part of the ridge, while the European has a different signal overall. You've got still a trough here over portions of Ukraine and Western Russia, but it's not as strong, and it's not able to break through this ridge. And this may be just natural uncertainty, but there also can be some issues with the GFS and the European. The European can sometimes go strong with ridges, a bit too strong at times. The GFS can sometimes go weaker with ridges, stronger with troughs. Exactly which one's going to come true, not exactly sure, but this is something that we do need to pay attention to if you are looking for land impacts here in Western India, Pakistan, and Oman, as this does bring the system into differing locations on these models. You can see, like I showed you on the GFS, we had the system coming into Pakistan. On the European, the system comes into Oman as a much weaker system as well, I might add. Now, some of this might as well be dependent on exactly how strong the system is. The European, like I mentioned, is much weaker with the system. If the system is weaker, and I can show you this on a sounding from the European, it is more likely to feel a low-level flow, and you can see the low-level flow on the European. It keeps this system coming west, and that would make sense why the system comes towards Oman, as once it eventually strengthens, it's gotten so far west to where it starts coming north, when it's south of Oman. Whereas if you have a stronger storm, like on the GFS, it feels more of the mid to upper level flow, which is directing the storm more north. And like I said, if you get the system to come further north earlier, you can get the system to avoid Oman entirely. So there's some uncertainty here on exactly how strong the system may get and where the storm will track, and it's just important that you stay tuned to your local weather office and the Indian Meteorological Department, as they're going to have the best information on the system over the coming days. Now, Aki and I may have also noticed that we have some areas of low pressure trying to develop on these models in the Bay of Bengal. There is potential, let me find the exact frame, for some development here in the Bay of Bengal. I'm showing you the 850 millibar flow on the GFS, and you can see we've got this general trough here over the southern Bay of Bengal here, and illustrated by the wind flow there on the plot. Now we've got two ridges in place here. They're fairly weak. We've got one here over northern and central India, and there's another weak one. It might be hard to pick up, but there seems to be, from what I can tell, a weak one to the south of this trough. And now you can see as we go over time, this trough is going to be wedged between these ridges. The southeast one becomes more prominent here as we go in time. So now we've got these two ridges surrounding this trough. And now what you've got is a general region of background vorticity from these areas of high pressure. You've got this bridge pushing winds towards the southwest here on the northern side, and you've got on this bridge on the south side pushing winds towards the northeast. This creates a general belt of increased background vorticity, and alongside the vorticity that already exists here with this trough, we may see the system try to spin up into a broad area of low pressure. And you can see that take shape here on the GFS. By this weekend, we have a broad area of low pressure developed here in central Bay of Bengal. Now, it's important to say that's broad because broad systems can take their time to develop, much more so than compact systems like our friend on the Arabian Sea here on the model. And the development has not been very rapid on these models. The GFS has been pretty gradual with development. You can see it meanders around here for a couple days, but then eventually by late next week, we see, maybe a tropical storm coming into eastern India or Bangladesh. And the European has a general same idea on this, of potentially a weak system. And there's a lot of uncertainty on exactly where the system may track. Some ensembles want this to come into central eastern India. Some areas some models try and get this to come into Bangladesh. And the reason being, this is so far out. This is late next week, and it's Tuesday right now. So lots of uncertainty. And we'll just have to keep an eye on this. And like I said with 91A, just make sure you stay tuned to your local weather office and the Indian Meteorological Department for the latest information on that. All right, we're now going to move to the West Pacific real quick as we have a tropical depression here off the coastline of Vietnam. The system formed yesterday, and you can see we have just some general disorganized thunderstorm activity here. It's not a very organized tropical depression. This is sort of in a region of just monsoonal activity. And this system is fairly weak. And ASCAP Pass confirmed that winds were about 30 to 35 knots. It's about 35 to 40 miles per hour. Not very strong, and the system is not likely to get very strong, but the system will likely bring some heavy rainfall along the coastlines of Hainan and Vietnam, as the system is going to continue to track northwest, sort of making a gap here between Hainan and Vietnam, but it will likely get stuck here west of Hainan as a frontal system comes down from China and stops it in its track. And you can see this on the GFS. Here's the system right now on the model here, fairly weak as I told you it was, and the system is not likely to intensify too much. But you can see as it gets towards the region that I talked about west of Hainan, east of Vietnam, it just starts to stall. And you'll see you'll have this area of low pressure develop in the Sea of Japan, and stretching down from it is this frontal system. You can sort of tell that by some of the stronger winds rushing down here west of South Korea. And you can also tell by some of the wind shift here. We've got more northeasterly winds on the back side of this front, and more, I guess, similar winds there, but it looks more southerly on the other end of this front. So with all this general northerly or northwesterly flow coming down with this front, as this front comes down, you can see how this would stop the storm in its tracks. This is now going to start pushing it back towards the south, keeping it away from China. You can see that happen on the model. Our system starts to come down further south and just meanders around here, and then eventually weakens between Hainan and Vietnam on this model. So not overly strong. We're not looking at a big typhoon, but as I said, we could still get some heavy rain here, as the system is already producing some heavy rainfall and has been over the past several days. And this is the Japan Meteorological Agency forecast cone showing that general idea that I just talked about there, with the system coming up here in between Vietnam and Hainan and then stalling and maybe drifting southwards as that frontal system continues to pass further south. All right, we're now going to move back to the South Pacific. This is the first time we've had to really talk about the South Pacific in months, as we are getting towards cyclone season. Cyclone season starts in about half a month, on November the 1st, and we're already looking at potential development here. There's potential development on the Western Pacific end and the South Pacific side. We're not going to talk about the Western Pacific end, as that really is not an imminent land threat over the next 7 days, unlike the other systems I'm discussing today. But you can see generally what's helping the system to develop is we have what's called a westerly wind burst occurring along the equator. And what that is it's a region of anomalous westerly winds that is a natural process. This happens across the Indian Ocean and the West Pacific, typically several times across the year. You can get tropical cyclones to develop here. So you have westerly winds along the equator, and following the general trade winds of the planet, you have generally easterly winds south of that. And in areas in the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, you get this general region of background vorticity that's naturally supported by this westerly wind burst here. You can see how that may play out, and you can see it playing out there on the GFS with this broad area of low pressure spinning up from the general background vorticity that I just mentioned there. Now, the GFS has been very bullish on this system. It has been constantly showing a strong cyclone here developing. Now, something to keep in mind, we are not even a cyclone season yet in the South Pacific. It is very early in the season, and while certainly it may not be impossible to get a strong system here, I certainly put a word of caution to it, at least until we get a formed system active. The GFS can, and it has done this a lot, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. It has a lot this year, have hyped up a system, formed it very strongly, and then eventually the system just doesn't get as strong as the GFS had depicted here. I feel like this might be a case here because there are some factors that may, especially with us being in the early part of the season in the South Pacific, may keep something like this from happening. But of course, it's not impossible, so we'll have to keep an eye on this. But the system is forecast to potentially develop here. The Bureau of Meteorology is giving this about a moderate chance of development. But you can see by day 7 here, this is by early next week, we have a cyclone developed here, and it's impacting areas near Vanuatu and east of Papua New Guinea. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty on exactly where the system may track. Naturally, this is a broad area of low pressure that is developing here on the model. So you could get the system developing here, or here, or here, and that could have huge implications of exactly where the system may track. You can see sort of that uncertainty here on the GFS. This is by day 5. You can see this large spread in the potential regions of development, and it only grows as you go towards day 7. You can see this large potential envelope of tracks. So it is something to pay attention to if you're in the Solomon Islands or in Papua New Guinea. And it's just a reminder, it's cyclone season. It's almost cyclone season. We're only about 13 days, about 2 weeks away from cyclone season. So it's important that you get your cyclone preparedness kit ready for the upcoming season. As it may be, and I may talk about this in a video in the next couple of weeks, but it may be a busy season here in the South Pacific especially. But we'll talk about that at a later time. But make sure you stay tuned to your local weather office and your official Tropical Cyclone Warning Center. I'm just going to leave links to really any Tropical Cyclone Center I can find in the description below, so it may be a long list, but you can find, hopefully if I can find everything, your local weather office there. We've got the Bureau of Meteorology map here. This is a brand new map that they've rolled out this season. And I really like this as it gives you a more interactive view, especially in the AU region particularly, on exactly what may happen over the next 7 days. And you can see they're marking it here by Friday for very low potential development. But as you go in time, as you go towards the weekend and into early next week, chances do increase, and we start to get towards moderate chances of development here with what they've deemed 1U here, and this large region here of potential development there, as you saw in the GFS. I'll leave a link to this in the description as well. It's a very neat interactive map, and I'm very glad that they brought that out for this cyclone season. All right, we're now going to move to the East Pacific as we have two systems to talk about here off the coastline of Mexico and Central America. We've got Tropical Storm Norma here off the coastline of Mexico. This system is forecast to strengthen and could become a hurricane. It's likely to become a hurricane, I'd say, and could be yet another hurricane threat for Baja California and the coastline of Mexico later this week. And we also have another system here off the coastline of Central America. This one we're not really going to be talking about too much. It's forecast to meander around the Pacific for the next several days, and it might become a system of greater interest late this weekend and into early next week. But staying in the big picture, just to look at Norma overall, you can see we have a lot of banding features forming around this system, and it's looking pretty healthy right now. I'm actually surprised that this system has not been designated as a tropical cyclone until now. But this system is now developed into a tropical cyclone, and we have alongside the curved band structure, we've also got a lot of divergence aloft. You can see all this upper level cirrus expanding away, and I can show you this in the water vapor loop as well. You can see all that upper level cirrus going far away north, but we also have a good moisture supply. We have the intertropical convergence zone or monsoon trough here southwest of the storm, and this is helping to just feed the system overall with a ton of good moisture. And this is a very favorable look for the system, and I would not be surprised, to see this system intensify quite significantly. And I'm looking for the National Hurricane Center advisories. I started recording this before the advisory came out, so I will show you the forecast cone in just a moment. But in terms of this environment, it is forecast to sustain. This is the GFS model output on Thursday morning. This is actually Thursday night local time, and you can see this general jet streak here over the region, and this is forecast to sustain as this trough here. There's an upper level trough right now, and this trough is forecast to get cut off by a large and strong upper level ridge here over the western United States. Originally, this trough was this upper level low by now was connected to this trough digging in over the midwestern United States, but this bridge came in and cut it off into an upper low. And now because this upper low is staying, we have a lot more significant winds aloft, and you can see the outflow layer of Norma now coming through here and meeting this jet streak, and that's a very favorable look, and we have seen that in very recent memory with Hurricane Lydia. Now, importantly, it does not look like this is going to be a Lydia repeat. This system will likely, the ceiling may be a bit high here, just given the environment, but there are some limiting factors here. One could be Lydia, and what I mean by that is the system tracked across this general region all of last week and into last weekend. So there was a lot of upwelled waters there from the system. And you can actually see this here in the ship's rapid intensification index. You can see there's an area of lower oceanic heat content and lower sea surface temperatures in this plot. It's not significant. It's not a great deal of damage done to, the sea surface temperatures, but it may cause a little bit of a pause of the system, especially with the lower oceanic heat content. Although, having said that, you can see as we get towards day 2 and day 3, oceanic heat content comes up and sea surface temperatures also go up as it comes into a region that Lydia did not tap into, and that may lead to a very strong storm. And we do have significant rapid intensification odds here. You can see very significant odds here. And typically, if you're not looking at these maps, or I guess plots regularly, typically I personally say significant odds if it's 30 to 40% or greater. And we have that here on ships. And you can see a lot of those odds are significant for pretty significant intensification in the next 24 to 48 to 72 hours here. And we'll have to watch that for exactly how strong the system may get. And we'll have to exactly watch, how far north does it come. There is a bit of uncertainty on exactly where the system may eventually come into Mexico, even if it will. That may even still be part of the question. With the ridge over the western United States, it is similar to Lydia it is going to try and push the system towards the northwest. It's going to try and push it away from the coastline of Mexico. That's good, but we have another trough here. You can sort of see it here on the northwestern part of this plot. That is going to dig in, and eventually on this model, it actually has a system come into Mexico. Now, what you also saw there is the system actually slowed down as it got towards Cabo San Lucas here on the model. That's because we have this ridge here west of the system, and if the system is a little bit further west, it is possible that this ridge might actually be able to stop the system entirely. In fact, this is actually shown on the European, and you can see that here. We have the system, it comes north, but this ridge stops it, and the system just starts to drift around and really doesn't come up towards the Baja California Peninsula until this trough digs in and picks it up. But by that time, it's a lot more weak. So there's a bit of uncertainty there, and I'm going to pull up the National Hurricane Center forecast cone right now. Like I said, I'm recording this after, or I was recording this before the advisory came out, so you can see here's a forecast cone now, and you can see that general forecast, what I talked about with the system coming north and intensifying into a hurricane. And right now it looks like they're going towards more of a GFS scenario, having the system come towards the coastline of Baja California there. But of course, keep in mind there's a little bit of uncertainty here. But if you're in Baja California or along the coastline of Mexico, make sure you stay tuned to the National Hurricane Center, as they're going to have the best information ahead of the storm, and they're going to have the latest advisories so you can prepare accordingly. And make sure you stay tuned to your local weather office ahead of the storm. All right, finally moving to the North Atlantic. This has been very long. I feel like I'm talking in the peak season here, but it's mid-October, and it does not really feel like it in the Atlantic with Invest 94L here. We are in the MDR, just to get your position straight. This is South America here. This is northeastern South America. So we're pretty far out there in the Atlantic still. We're well east of the Caribbean islands, and you can see we have a large disturbance here with 94L. You can see a general wave pocket sort of like that, maybe an area of increased vorticity here on the northern end. And over the coming days, this is going to track towards the west-northwest, and we do have some concern that this system will likely develop and could potentially impact the Leeward Islands. If we look at the GFS model on this, and I'll go back, I kind of spoiled the ending there, but you can see it has the general same picture that I just outlined there, with this large trough axis here across the tropical Atlantic and that area of increased vorticity on the northern end. Now, the models are, particularly the GFS and the European, are a bit uncertain on exactly how the system may develop. If you're on the GFS's side, you've got a tropical cyclone over the next coming days, and it potentially gets very close or just misses the Leeward Islands on this run. But the European is a bit different. If we look at a similar time frame, not similar time frame, this is a Thursday morning local time. The wave is actually here, east of the islands here. And what's happening now is the European has not developed it yet. And what I can see of what's actually, making it not develop is if you look here in the wind barbs, there's a lot of strong winds here. And the strong winds here are starting to stretch out the system. Like I talked about with the development of Invest 91A, for an ideal scenario for developing tropical cyclone, you want low-level convergence and upper-level divergence. What we have here is what appears to be more so low-level divergence away. So winds at the surface are sort of spreading away from the system. And you can see that sort of taking place with this vorticity or spin in yellow being completely stretched out. You can see the wave pocket is here, but we've got vorticity way, way up here, well northwest of the system. If we look at the relative humidity, again, the wave pockets, I think it's about here on the model. All this moisture has been really strung out over a very large region. And for tropical cyclones, you want that to all be compact, and you want to be in one centralized region of low pressure, not stretched out over a great distance like we have here on the European. And that seems to be why the European has the system struggling so much. And this is something to watch, because now, the GFS has been consistent now on having a formidable tropical storm, maybe a hurricane coming through here on the this weekend or next week in the Leeward Islands. While the European now is showing, maybe you still get some strong winds and heavy rainfall, but this is nowhere near a strong tropical storm. It may not even be a tropical storm by this point in reality. Now, regardless of development, keep in mind that with these strong winds north of the system, you'll still likely have some strong winds. Now, the good news is if the track does keep this system coming north of the islands, you'll avoid some of that wind, but keep in mind there may be some chance of the system that comes, I guess, further west. You'll see this in the ensemble plot. There are a couple ensembles that still suggest this. If the system does remain too weak, maybe even a bit weaker here on the European, it will just follow the more trade wind flow, which would carry into the Caribbean, and that could get you some stronger winds there rather than the system coming north like you see on the European right now in the GFS. Now, this is the 500 millibar flow chart from the GFS, and you can see, assuming the system does develop and it does get, strong enough with thunderstorms to feel this flow, the general pattern is going to be that this system is going to come northwest under the influence of this ridge, and this trough is going to dig in, erode the western end of the ridge, and we're actually going to get the system to track into the central Atlantic, very similar to other storms that we've had this season. Just a little side note, as I think this is very neat to point out. There are two signs here for things that are very connected here across the tropics worldwide. Talked about in my last video last week that Typhoon Belavin would have been potentially a factor for Invest 94L behind Sean. And from what I can tell, as it amplified in portions of Alaska, south of Alaska, we're getting the amplification of the ridge over North America, and now we're getting amplification of a trough. You can see this trough amplified, and that's why we've had such cool weather in the eastern United States this week. That amplified, and we had by then a developing ridge over the central Atlantic, aided by Belavin. And now, for Norma, the trough that I described that split apart, the northern part of that trough that now digs into the midwestern United States, you can see that here. This is going to dig in over the eastern United States, and eventually it's going to come into the western Atlantic, and that will be the trough that erodes the western end of the ridge and recurves Invest 94L into the central Atlantic. Very neat to see all things connected there. Just wanted to point that out. But this leaves some good news, because now a lot of the tracks are carrying the system generally near or northeast of the Caribbean islands. We're not seeing tracks like we had suggested a couple days ago to where the system might be strong and coming through the Caribbean and be an unusual Eastern Caribbean hurricane cruiser in mid-October. Now, there is still potential, as I said, for land impacts here. This is a super ensemble plot, and you can see a lot of these tracks here. I'll go to, I guess, day 4, and you can see the ellipse here. A lot of tracks here are getting the system very close to the islands. So it's very important, if you're in the islands, that you stay tuned to your local weather office and the National Hurricane Center. Now, speaking of the National Hurricane Center, you can see this is their tropical weather outlook. They're giving the system about an 80% chance of development as it moves towards the general west-northwest, and then this general track back towards the north as we get towards the late part of this week and into this weekend. But you can see the Leeward Islands still well within the region of potential formation. And like I said, stay tuned to your local weather office and the National Hurricane Center. And like I said, I'll leave a lot of links in the description so you can go ahead and click those from what I can find at least, and quickly go to see all that local information. Well, that was a lot to talk about. I think my voice is starting to go out. I'll probably have a video out on Thursday. I don't know if my voice could take doing this every single day. But like I said, very busy week across the tropics. Stay safe in all the areas I talked about that are going to be impacted by systems this week. Again, I'll probably have another video out Thursday or Friday. Let my voice recover from this a little bit. But thank you all for watching. Stay safe again. I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching.